Good afternoon, Saitlanders. How are you? We trust that you're very well. Before we continue, I just want to clarify something. We used to use a camera, right? That was remote controllable, and you could change the zoom and tilt it and pan it and everything you like. And that camera gave up the ghost. And on a couple of occasions since I've been using the newer, much simpler camera, I've remarked on how it makes the sign behind me look skewed. And apparently I didn't explain myself very well, because somebody thought that I was suggesting that the sign had been hung skew or stuck, fixed skew. Not the case at all. It's the camera, not the sign. Anyway, I want to chat to you about a prophecy of Siener van Rensburg's that I've discussed on a number of occasions in very big interviews worldwide. I do a few every month, and which I have covered quite well on our WhatsApp groups. You know, the 3 ones that I run. It's for our foreign friends, overseas people only. It's for Mr. Miller and some other people whose details and telephone numbers and so on should remain in confidence, and sponsors and so on of sponsors and facilitators of my big tours to Europe. And lastly, a WhatsApp group for Saitlanders, leaders, provincial leaders, national departments heads, Onderleiersraad, and so on. But I've not really spoken about it in any of these videos, and I think that you might appreciate this because it is a very, very interesting topic, this particular prophecy. As Louis would say, without going into surnames, in die volksmond, Simon, in die volksmond. Sometimes when I ask him questions about farming or the mountains or bush, trees, birds, whatever, and he doesn't have an academic explanation, he'll say to me, look, I don't know what the scientists say, but in die volksmond sê ons die naam is die en dit werk so and what have you. So, in die volksmond loop die prophecy so. So in colloquial terms, we would say in English, the prophecy runs as follows. England is submerged. Other people use the terminology, England disappears under the waves, and so on. Now, whether or not that is an accurate interpretation of what Siener van Rensburg actually said is debatable. I'm not saying that I doubt it. I am saying that I'm not going to sit here and tell you that is definitively the explanation and the meaning of what he said. But it is indeed the generally accepted meaning or explanation of what he said. And if we assume that that is correct, then it's a very intriguing prophecy. Because, oh, and by the way, that would be the 6th plague, the 5th or the 6th, the 6th plague that Siener van Rensburg said would come over England. I suppose Great Britain really, but again, to use Volksmond, people say England to represent the entire United Kingdom. But now, how could such a thing possibly happen? How do you drown an entire island? In fact, I'm going to, if you will indulge me, whoopsie, Britain's highest point. That's not what I wanted. I would like to see an image giving a side profile, but I'm not finding that. There we go. is 1,345 meters. What is South Africa's highest point, by way of comparison? Is 3,450 meters. It is Mount Mafadi, located on the border of South Africa and Lesotho. Okay, excuse me. So that gives you some idea. England or Great Britain is not a very highly elevated place. It's low-lying. But still, how do you drown an entire island, a miniature continent? It sounded always in my ears to be an inscrutable prophecy, a prophecy that you couldn't scrutinize. You couldn't stare at it for hours and scratch your brain and take a pencil and a rubber and a ruler and a piece of paper, and there was nothing you could do to penetrate it. Inscrutable. Nothing you could do to penetrate it, to get anywhere towards any degree of understanding. Now, something very interesting happened. Some years ago, in 2015, Vladimir Putin gave a speech in which he warned the US and the West of their provocative behavior. The behavior that has indeed led up to the Ukraine war. Many of you will know from interviews and videos that I've done, excuse me everybody, that since arguably 2004, this goes back a long way to the first Viktor Yanukovych election. We won't go into all of that. The West has clearly been meddling in Russia. We know that the CIA, I beg your pardon, in Ukraine. We know that the US State Department, that's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the United States, is called the State Department. And the CIA have been causing lots and lots and lots of trouble. They've incited riots and violence and coups, deposing of presidents, and all sorts of things. And so in 2015, Vladimir Putin gave a certain speech, in which he admonished them. And during that speech, a camera caught a person, a bigwig, a top brass dude, in other words, a military senior person, with something like this. Something like, this is a bit tatty, it's a bit old, so excuse its appearance, it's well worn. A document like that in front of him on the table. So Vladimir Putin is speaking. In fact, I think that camera shot was from just before the speech began. Nevertheless. And people are gathered, sitting around big tables, very formal, serious meeting. The boss is here. Everybody's on their best behavior, eating with knives and forks, the whole lot. They've got their notes, pen, pencil, rubber, ruler, got everything open. And the camera catches schematic drawings for a new secret weapon. Subsequently, Russia said that it was an accidental revelation, an accidental leak, if you like. The US official take on it was that it was deliberate, that it was a warning, and that camera was meant to putatively, supposedly, accidentally, kamstig, per ongeluk, catch that image of the super secret weapon on this page. It turned out that was the what has come to be known as the Poseidon nuclear underwater or unmanned submarine drone. We'll get into the details of it in a second, but you may think of it quite simply as a torpedo launched from a submarine like a normal torpedo, but giant, absolutely giant in size. 24 meters long, with a huge diameter, with a nuclear warhead in the front of it and a nuclear engine inside of it. So it's nuclear powered and it's nuclear armed. This came out over time. It was announced in 2018. Vladimir Putin said, this thing that people have been talking about for some time, well, I can tell you today that it's ready for action. We're going to begin production soon. The prototypes have been successful. And we'll have, I believe it was 30 by 2027. 30 of them. Okay. I'll give you the details of it quickly. It's 24 meters long. It has a 10,000 kilometer range, meaning that the amount of fissile material, presumably uranium, but maybe plutonium, who knows, that drives, that powers, that fuels the nuclear reactor, that drives the propeller, is enough fuel for it to travel for 10,000 kilometers. But it doesn't have to do that 10,000 kilometers in one fell swoop. It can rest in between, and it can rest indefinitely. Allegedly, I don't know. I haven't checked gone to Russia to see for myself, but they say practically indefinitely, meaning that it can be deployed and it can find its way to a certain place and then hide there with its systems in a sort of a hibernation for as long as it likes, and then be reactivated to continue its journey to its destination. And it can be reprogrammed over and over and over again. So, it has 1,000 kilometer range. It can travel at 1,000 meters deep, which is very, very, very deep in sea terms. And it has a speed of about 100 kilometers an hour. The lowest estimates are 90 kilometers an hour, and the highest claims by the Russians are 200 kilometers an hour. Let's just say it's 100 kilometers an hour. For an undersea vehicle of any description, that's very, very fast. And it has a warhead between 2 megatons and 100 megatons. Now, that's a big window for error, but be patient. If it was just, by the way, I should point out that the warhead, the calculations or the estimates of the size of the warhead are based upon calculations of the volumes inside this vessel. And the boffins have worked out that these are people who obviously who know and understand how much would the wall thickness of the capsule, the outer wall of the submarine, how much would that be? What gauge of wires would you use for nuclear, how big would the propeller's shaft be? They know what they're doing. Obviously, there's room for error, because the Russians might have used this cable and not that wire, and they might have used this type of circuit board and not that one, and this one is 2 inches bigger than that one. But no matter how you look at it, it is liable to be bigger than 2 megatons and up. Now, 2 megatons, to give you some idea, is I've got to get this right, 13,300%. 13,300%, 133 times the size of the little boy bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima in Japan in 1945 by the Americans from the airplane, the Enola Gay, captained by Paul Tibbets. I don't know if you remember, there was that song in the 80s. Enola Gay, you should have stayed at home yesterday. Okay. I can't remember who sang the song. I can just remember the words. It was sort of a favorite for me when I discovered what it was about. Anyway, the maximum possible size is 100 megatons, and that's probably unlikely. But even if it was 50 megatons, it would be a mind-bogglingly powerful nuclear weapon. It may be, this is nobody's suggesting that it is, but the scholars, more than one, a number of scholars, have acknowledged that it could possibly be the second largest nuclear warhead ever to have been created and the largest one in existence. It would be smaller than the famous Tsar Bomba nuclear thingamajiggy, but that one was used. The one that was detonated in Siberia, very famous Soviet undertaking, the Tsar Bomba nuclear test in Russia in the 60s, I believe. And there are others like the mother of all bombs that the US, whatever, but this would be the biggest or one of the biggest in existence now, potentially. And that gives you some idea of how phenomenal this warhead may be. But even if it's not that big, it's, as I say, 13,300% greater than the little boy bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Mental. Absolutely mental. I'm just trying to figure out in what order I should say things. Okay, so this thing was going to come into existence. In March, by 2027, in March of last year, 2022, about a month after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, on the Thursday, the 24th of February, the Russians had managed to persuade the Ukrainians to enter a peace deal. And the nature of the peace deal was that the Donbass republics, that is to say Donetsk and Luhansk, the two Russian ethnic dominated, not republics, I beg your pardon, at that time, oblasts, provinces of Ukraine, over which this whole dispute began, or partly over which, they would remain Ukrainian, but they would become autonomous. The Ukrainians would allow the Russians under law to speak their own language, to be educated in Russian, and so on and so forth. Boris Johnson flew to Ukraine shortly after that. Shortly after this point in time, in late March, early April, in which the Ukrainians and the Russians appeared to be figuring out their stuff. And Boris Johnson, representing the West, he was then the Prime Minister of the UK, said to Zelensky, "Don't do it, keep fighting, we're behind you all the way. Damn those Russians." And so the Ukrainians abandoned the peace talks. First drafts of the treaties already existed, but they were abandoned before the final drafts could be drafted and signed. The Russians took great offense to the behavior of Boris Johnson on behalf of NATO, the USA, and the EU. As far as the Russians were concerned, That was like somebody coming from outside to meddle in a dispute between a husband and a wife, and to antagonize the one party, to work them up, get them all worked up against the other party. You have no place here, and what you're doing is wicked. You are going to ensure the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. That was the Russians' point of view. And of course, it has turned out to be the case. We know that in recent months, various sources have revealed, some by mistake, some intentionally, that the Ukrainian losses are well above 100,000. And the Russians, possibly a tenth, a fifth, somewhere around there, of the Ukrainians. So, on the 1st of May of last year, a very famous program on Russia featured this matter. It's a Sunday night program, and it's a bit of a cult program in Russia, a bit like Carte Blanche in South Africa. Many people of a certain class, for want of a better word, people who can afford Mnet and DSTV and more educated people, northern suburbs people, they're fanatical about Carte Blanche. We all know this. Carte Blanche has stayed alive over 30 years because people keep watching it. Russia has a similar program on a Sunday night that is presented by a guy called Dmitry Kaselyov. And he, on this Sunday night, chose as his theme Boris Johnson and the West instigating war when it was unnecessary to do so, and what Russia would do to retaliate. And he spoke about the Poseidon nuclear torpedo. And he claimed that the tsunami that it could generate if it was detonated near to a coast could be as high as 500 meters. You've all seen the Burj Khalifa building in Dubai, haven't you? We've all seen it. Tallest building in the world. Okay. It is 830 meters tall. And that building is mind-bendingly tall. If you saw a wall of water a few kilometers long, only 5/8 of that in height, it would be the greatest thing that you had ever seen in your life. Whether Dmitry Kaselyov's claim is true or not, kind of doesn't matter, because even if he was bull dusting by double, let's say it's only 250 meters, hey, let's say it's only 200 meters tall. A 200-meter tsunami is like 10 times the height of the tsunamis that we've seen hit Japan and other places. A 20-meter wave is just, you don't get such things. I know. I was something of an expert in riding big waves. In fact, I got into a lot of trouble because the Natal Mercury newspaper took photographs of me and published them on the front page. Huge. Whole of the front page one day. And that led my parents to calculate that I couldn't have been at university that day. Anyway, it's mind-bending. Unless you understand these heights, it's difficult to comprehend fully. He says, this is what we're going to do. We're going to send these Poseidons against Britain, and we're going to drown it forever. Nobody will survive. And we're not going to send one. We might send 6. Think for yourself. Now, Does this mean that that's what Siener van Rensburg had in mind? No, it doesn't mean that that's definitely what he had in mind, or what the Lord had in mind when he inspired Siener van Rensburg with the gift of the Holy Spirit to receive those visions from himself, from he, our Lord. No, we don't know for sure. But isn't it a fantastic story? And so wonderful to contemplate. That this inexplicable, improbable, this kind of, these are the visions that cause people, skeptical people, not to believe in Siener van Rensburg because it's too improbable. Can't happen. It's like you get these, what do you call these skeptics, people who don't believe in God. You know who I'm talking about. To say virgin birth, a virgin birth, and for them that's enough to abandon all faith, certainly in Christianity anyway. It's nonsense in their minds. And the same with some of Siener van Rensburg's prophecies. They're just too improbable for some people to believe that they could ever be truthful. And many of us who do have faith in Siener as a prophet struggle with some of them. I struggled with that one for a long time. I didn't disbelieve it, but I couldn't figure it out. And I just thought I would share that with you today. This potential explanation of a prophecy given over 100 years ago for the dim times in which we live, the dim, dark, and dangerous times in which we live today. Let me just tell you, if this stuff fascinates you, listen to Mr. Miller's sermons in the morning and the evening on Radio Groot Rivier. He does an excellent job of explaining this stuff and bringing it back to biblical verses. And again, you might find yourself thinking at first, well, I don't know, but by the time Mr. Miller's finished with you, you'll be thinking, golly, that's not that difficult to believe. Wait, I'm going to press pause and I'm going to just tell you a quick anecdote, but I've got to fetch a book. Yeah, it's not here. Mr. Miller has described at great length why it may be, and I would go so far as to say is, quite certainly is, this, what's happening in Ukraine, the Third World War or the beginnings of it. And he has substantiated that position, that claim, with tremendous amounts of evidence from the Bible, from the prophet Alois Erlmeyer, from Alina Aiello, my voice, Siener van Rensburg, and others. But he was describing one thing that was, it's not that I didn't believe it, but I wasn't, how can we be sure? You say that, but how do we know? With all due respect, that's the way I am. I have been since I was a kid. Very much so. So, I got this book. I had it, but I got it off the shelf. And I went and double-checked. Lo and behold, for however many years, since forever, those terminologies and names and so on have been understood to possess those meanings. I went on to Google Earth. I've got some very old maps. I did every piece of research that I could think of doing. Fortunately, I had the resources to do it. And it's just phenomenal to engage in that mental voyage of discovery of the truth. It's such a powerful experience. And I tell you, you're missing out if you're not listening to those talks twice daily. That's just my advice to you. That's all. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that you appreciated it. I hope that it was educational. And I look very much forward to making many more videos for you. And I don't know if this sounds a bit silly, but I want to say with you, because I have you, the audience, very much in mind. I don't know, it might sound weird, but I have you in mind when I say these things. I have specific faces, and I try to feel what people might be thinking and feeling themselves in response to my words. So, as silly as it might sound to others, it's perhaps not so silly when I say making more videos with you this year. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye, and God bless all of you.